We talk about consciousness as if it's something each of us carries around in our own private skull. My awareness, your awareness, separate and contained. But what if it's not that way? What if that's not how it works? In this episode of Higher Reality, we explore the growing evidence that consciousness may be shared, interconnected, and far more collective than our individualistic culture assumes. Join us for this episode, Is Consciousness in Your Skull? Tell me what your understanding of the collective conscious is.
Well, it's pretty simple to get that there are certain things that human beings believe. And we tend to all believe it. We just accept it. We don't even think about it. We don't question it. We don't try to challenge it. And here's an easy example. For many millennia of the human experience, human beings basically believed that the planet was flat.
Right.
Nobody argued. The planet is flat. That was the understanding. We all stayed with it. Well, not you and I, at least not in our current lifetimes, but way back when. But then some people who observed that there was perhaps a curvature, or when a ship went off into the distance, it didn't just disappear into nothingness. It actually went down as though the curvature of the planet was there. And noticing things like that caused them to challenge it. The church went bananas. They didn't want any part of that. The earth was flat. But eventually, when we realized, especially once you could take a ship all the way around the planet, nobody's going to argue anymore. And the new consensus of human beings was that the earth was round and that we were on a sphere floating through space. And all of that, is an example of how we can go from one absolute agreed to way of seeing the world to something entirely different.
I hear that. And I think it brings up so many concepts about this collective consciousness and how we learn and what we learn, as well as neuroscience, how we learn. Global study that was done on consciousness back, originally it was Princeton University that started it. I think it's still going.
Mm-hmm.
And that project started in 1998. And I don't know, have you heard about this?
What's it called?
It's called the Global Consciousness Project.
I don't know that I have. Tell me.
So basically what they did is they monitor random noise, and the random noise or frequencies on the planet. And basically it's always seems to be random, but certain events cause it to go less random. And
Okay, I
that
have heard of this.
and
I,
that
I
I
have.
like 2001, 9/11,
Right.
these various events cause it to slightly.
Then they can perceive patterns in all
Right.
of this that seems
Yeah.
so chaotic and unpredictable. Suddenly it had some patterns at points of high interest.
Correct. And their findings suggest that the common consciousness hears about this, or to hear is not the way to say it, but participates in that collective. And so therefore it knows when something's going to happen. Now, the interesting part to me was the patterns shifted slightly to non-random before the events actually took place.
Really?
Yeah.
As though there was some level of or expectation around it.
Did it pick up what was going to happen because of the consciousness of those participating in the events? Or all that's a mystery. And Noetic Sciences, Dean Radin, the scientist there, wrote in his book all about this. And I haven't gotten a chance to read it all, but it is interesting that it happened before. And then the pattern stabilized during, and then it went back to randomness.
Which and are there theories on what this means?
Well, the project was simply trying to see if there's a pattern where the collective consciousness participates so that we get this proof of collective consciousness rather than the theories of collective consciousness. Now, this is admittedly a little bit out there, but it does in the studies, and it's like I said, it's still going today. Even the tsunami they had in Thailand, I think it was way back, they showed the same kinds of non-randomness patterns showing up.
Mhm.
And so, and it started, and this is this interesting point. It started about anywhere from a minute, 30 seconds to a minute before the event happened. Now, in Thailand, all the animals moved to high ground over a minute before the tsunami.
Right. Yes, I've
So
heard that.
are they participating in the collective consciousness?
I see no reason for them not to. Sentient beings, they may not speak our language, but they're obviously something going on in there.
And it does make the argument that everything participates in.
Well, there have been
Yeah.
experiments done with plants where they will bring an open flame close to a plant that's connected to a device that can measure its energy and find that it goes crazy. It
Yeah.
it screams like it's going to die. So it's not. I think consciousness is far from just being a human trait.
And I think it goes to Rupert Sheldrake's work that he did on the morphic field. And I think that the morphic field could actually be another way of saying the quantum field.
Hmm.
In quantum mechanics, we talk about everything is basically a quantum field, whether it's a plant and its energy, or they're all, when ourselves, we're all participating in this collective and in this quantum field and interacting with it.
Right. Right.
So what did Holmes and some of the early New Thought or metaphysicians say about this idea of collective consciousness? I know Holmes talked about it quite a bit.
Yes, he did. He gave it a weird name. He called it race consciousness. So the collective consciousness is a much better descriptor. But
Yeah.
what he pointed out, the bottom line was challenge everything. Not with aggression, but just think about it before you accept that someone says something is so. In fact, challenge your own thoughts. See if there's something there that really you've accepted, but when you examine it further, it's not real. And I found myself in this many times where I've said, great example, this is going to be hard. What a setup. And how often do we do that? Do we enter into an endeavor and say it's going to be hard? And what
Yeah.
happens? It's hard. It has to be hard. We said so. So we're not only falling into this pattern of accepting these general ideas from the collective, but we're also reinforcing it by our own thinking and saying that is so out loud or even to ourselves, which it creates a much more difficult time in our lives in many ways.
So we're talking about it, the thinking pattern gets set up in a negative way, it makes things harder. If it's set up in a positive way, it makes things easier.
Well, I think that's a fair way to say it.
Yeah.
The idea that if you're intent on doing something and letting it be okay, you can move through it. I've done spiritual mind treatment prayer work for people that they get an outcome, that they
Mhm.
pass a test, that they get a license, whatever it is, and never mentioned ease. And what ends up often happening is that it's a brutal process, but they get where they wanted to go. So,
Okay.
how do you want to design it? I mean, I think you can overplay this idea of ease. I remember one of my colleagues, Roger Teal in Denver, once gave a great talk about don't be praying for it to be easy. There may be something wonderful in the challenge of what you're doing that you would circumvent. So,
Yeah,
it's how you want to do it. I don't think there's a right or a wrong there. But I think that human beings generally accept a challenge as a burden rather than an opportunity. And if
I
we
agree.
change our focus, we'll get we'll have a different path to the result we want.
Does it not go back to the idea, if it's designed for this idea of survival, it's designed essentially to pick up more about the negative than about the positive.
Here's another one. It's not fair. God, haven't we all said that? What is fair? What does that mean? How does that work? Who said it's supposed to be fair? It's life,
Yeah,
and we're creating it. So if something happens that seems like, well, that didn't happen to this guy over here, but it's happening to me, that's not fair. It is the only thing that does is throw you into judgment and victimhood.
well,
Yet
it is a
everybody
judgment.
says it.
It is a judgment by
Yeah.
itself.
It is absolutely a judgment, we most people feel like they're entitled to fairness. That if it was fair for other people, it should be fair for them. But fairness is an illusion. It's not real.
Huh.
There's no fairness in life. There's only outcome. And
Right.
when we focus on the outcome we desire, we'll get there.
That brings up the idea, though, that whatever is in that collective consciousness and the part that you're playing into it that is not in your awareness is playing a part in that, is it not?
It is. It is. And
So how
and
do you
I
deal with that?
Well, when I teach people how powerful thought is, I ask them to write down all of their beliefs. Just go ahead, take your paper out, write down all of your beliefs. Nobody can do it, which is
Right.
the point. Where it comes up is when you're presented with something, you're presented with a challenge or an opportunity or anything else, your beliefs pop up. It's like seeing something happen, any event happen, you get it. That information has to go through your mind filters. And if something is out of alignment with that, if you believe something that's different than what you're experiencing or talking about, or however it's showing up, it'll pop up. And you're likely to say, well, in my life, blah, 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 blah. And often you'll find that that wasn't really even your belief, that someone else brought that into your consciousness, a parent, a teacher, somebody said that and you accepted it without much even thinking about it. You just accepted it that it was so. Now, is it possible that we get these ideas without ever having anyone say them out loud to us? I think so. I think there is that collective consciousness. It's not absolute, because if it were absolute, then we'd all be thinking the same thing all the time. But we're not. We have access to that, and if it's generally accepted in the culture, it could just pop up in our thinking.
So does it not bring up the idea that if it's a common consciousness and we have this idea that the time frame is our lifetime it participates, doesn't the idea of common consciousness say that it doesn't relate to time? And
Oh, I think
therefore,
that's
things
fair.
that happened prior to your existence are also in that space, such
Sure,
as flat Earth.
and certainly it's going to be in the future in many ways if it sustains. That you're going to keep demonstrating it over and over again, which just increases your sense that what you think is so. Where
Self-replicating brings
Yeah,
self-belief.
exactly. My Native American teacher, Will Rocking Bear, had a brilliant solution to this. People would say to him things that were clearly in the collective consciousness, that
Yeah,
something has to happen or should happen or whatever it is. And he had this great line. He just said, "That's not true for me."
yeah.
And that's not necessarily offending somebody. It's not saying you're wrong, but he's
No,
saying, in my consciousness, I don't accept that. And I think that was a clever way, and I've used it many times
sure.
to not let that thought in and let it take over. Just say, that's not true for me.
Right.
And that has helped.
That's good. And that's an important point because it keeps you out of that field of judgment. And
Sure. And
of
we
course,
tend to just be like sponges and absorb stuff we hear and accept it without thinking about it. So
and the
thinking about
ego,
the things we hear and see and such are really important.
we don't even question any of that stuff. We
A
just
lot of it we
assume.
don't, and that's the work.
That's
Boy, when
definitely
I
work.
got into metaphysics and started looking at life completely differently, it was amazing how much stuff that I believed all those years was completely irrelevant to me. And I'm so grateful for that, because I was pretty miserable back then.
It is interesting to me how easy it is for us, as I know for myself, how easy it is to judge myself.
Oh,
All the time,
eternal
it seems
critics.
to be, "Oh, I should have done it this way." All these things lead back to there's something wrong.
And we all have an internal critic. We have someone that will tell us we're wrong. It's our ego, but it has seems to have a personality unto itself. I had a
Oh,
teacher once that actually gave a name or a description to his inner critic. He called it an obese Nazi.
yeah.
And that kept him aware of it in a certain way. And I always chuckle when I think about that, because it really isn't that helpful. And you can't go to war with it. If
Right.
you do, you will lose, because it will grow just as strong as you can put up a defense against it.
Sure. That's the
So
nature of the ego.
so every day I have a little pledge that I make to myself. I say to myself, I no longer indulge in the debilitating act of self judgment, which in the past I used to deny the absolute perfection of my life.
Mhm.
Instead, I accept and embrace the beauty and magnificence of my life now. That's
Mhm.
one of the things I say in my spiritual practice every morning. And when something comes up in me that tells me I'm wrong, I say to that little voice inside of me, thank you for the information. I'm fine. And I move on. I don't argue with it. What's to argue? It's an opinion, but I know better.
Yeah. It starts to sound schizophrenic.
It probably does. But we've
Hello?
all
What?
got it. We all have an inner critic. Some of us never speak it out loud. Introverts don't. It's inside. You can maybe see it
Right.
on their face, but they won't say the words. Where an extrovert will just jump out, you dummy, talking to themselves, ourselves.
Right. Right. And I've seen that both ways, the internal processor and the one who just speaks it out.
Yep.
One of the ways I handle that voice is when it comes up is I ignore it. I don't participate in it at all,
Yeah.
and it goes away pretty quickly.
Good. That's good.
But when I do start to play with it, it wants to play more and more and more.
Oh,
It doesn't
yeah.
quit.
Oh, yeah. As
So
far as you let it in, it will gladly participate.
that sets up the idea Rupert Sheldrake came up with. That and the 100th monkey, which you and I were saying earlier, that we've heard it for a millionth times. And talk about that idea that comes out of the collective consciousness, and there's something about that we learn from.
Well, here's the story. I don't know if it's true or not. No, I've never had it
Yeah.
verified, but it really is something to think about. That there were a group of researchers that went to a South Pacific island that was inhabited by primates of some sort. I really don't know what kind of monkeys they were, but they lived in community on this island. And what the researchers did, they would put food out on the beach in the sand, and the food would get covered with sand. And so they would have to kind of brush it off and try to work around it or eat some of the sand. And it wasn't great, but they got food. So they
Mhm.
were functioning that way. And then at some point, one of the monkeys took the food and took it down to the water and washed it off and ate it. And others observed them doing that and followed. And pretty soon, that community at that beach and any other communities of primates on that island simultaneously started washing the food that was left for them. And not only did it happen on that island, but beyond that, primates on other islands learned to do it without ever having anything to see or hear that told them that's what they should do. They just suddenly knew. And that's given to the idea that there's a shared consciousness between all these beings that comes to a change in behavior.
So that morphic field or the quantum field, or hang on a second, I'm losing battery. Got to plug in.
An editing opportunity.
Yes, there are many. Okay, so talk about, let's talk about the paradox of chaos theory, and the idea that there's so much going
Okay.
on the planet right now, full of chaos. Hold on a second. It's not. Oh, there we go. Huh. It's blipping in and out. Okay, now it's stable. Talk about chaos. There it was. So this idea of chaos, and right now there's the appearance of a lot of chaos on the planet, whether it's political chaos, personal chaos, you name it. And there's a theory that says that out of the chaos, the change takes place.
And I got things to say about that. I want to start with the idea of chaos theory, which I learned from my teacher, Margaret Wheatley, who is brilliant in this idea and really kind of reframed the idea of chaos, meaning that chaos is a perception, it's not a reality. That everything has patterns, everything contains a sense of order, but we can't always recognize it. And
Mm.
I thought that was brilliant. So that what we think when we think things are chaotic, we kind of defer to it and we give into it, saying this is troublesome, this is a problem, this is something that's happening that I can't have any influence on it because it's chaos. She says otherwise, that it's still there. Be patient, continue to look, and you will find the order that exists within it. And I've followed that in my life. And there have been times when things looked very chaotic. I was at a minister's meeting in California early in my career, and these ministers started getting into an argument. I have no idea about what it was as long ago, but the room was just filled with this energy of upset.
Oh,
And
wow.
one minister, the one sitting next to me, closed her eyes and centered herself. And within less than 3 minutes, the whole room calmed down.
Mm.
And so I believe that we have this ability to control our environment. And when we see chaos, we're just buying into something that perhaps that is another one of those collective consciousness moments where we say this is wrong or bad or not working, and that really there's something working, we just can't see it. Now, if you're all right, I want to move into this thing that I wanted to share, because you brought up how does that impact us? And it
Yeah.
does, in a big way and a collective way. There was a book written in 1999 on research done in the 90s by two guys, William Strauss and Neil Howe.
Mm.
These two researchers were sociologists, and they went back as far as the mid 1400s,
Wow.
the time of the War of the Roses in England, and really followed this from an Anglo-American point of view, but followed it what happened in history for those generations and those centuries up till now. And what they found was fascinating. So here's what they found was that
Yeah.
there are generational cycles, and we give them names. We give everyone an independent name, but they tend to follow characteristics. There are four of them, and these researchers named them prophet, nomad, hero, and artist, and said that in order those generations come into being on planet Earth, this focusing mainly here again on the Anglo European American mindset. So
Yeah.
that's what's happening there, and that every fourth generation follows the same characteristics of the previous one. And these generations fall into what are called seculum. And the seculum is a period of between 80 to 100 years, an average long human lifetime. And within that period of time, 80 to 100 years, each seculum has four seasons. They didn't call them seasons, they called them turnings, because they
Okay.
move from one state of collective consciousness to another. And they are not random, they happen sequentially. And they can prove this, as I say, way back to the middle of the 14th century, that this happens over and over and over again.
Oh,
The four turnings have names and characteristics as well. The first one is called a high. It's where things really work. Life is good. And people work to create a better world.
okay.
Then there's the awakening. And that's where people start going, wait a minute, this may not be the best path. There are things that are happening here that really maybe we don't want. There are things to consider and look at. So it's a questioning time. Then there's the unraveling, where things that were so good now are not working. They're kind of falling apart. Everything seems to be moving into that state of chaos. And what do you think that fourth turning is? It's called the crisis. And again, these happen on an ongoing basis. Right
But
now,
But they're
We are in
generational?
it is, but see, people come in and out of lifetimes at different points, so they have different perspectives and different relationships with all of this. And so,
Yeah,
and
sure.
but every generation has its role in this, and to bringing it through these stations. And it's like, not that people know what they're doing, but this just seems to be the way the human experience is, at least from this perspective. So you got these turnings that are happening right now. We are in a fourth turning, which is predicted to be complete no later than 2030, which
Mhm.
at that point we should go into a high. But we haven't really experienced yet the full extent of a crisis based on what we have in the past. For example, the last major crisis period was during World War II.
Okay.
The one before that was the American Civil War. The one before that was the American Revolutionary War. So you can see that war played a major role in those. We are not in a high state of world war right now. So what does it mean? Well, it means
Mm.
either it's going to be different this time, or it's going to be something's going to happen pretty soon, and it's going to be pretty radical. We'll see what all happens. But the beauty of this nasty story is that it almost guarantees us that within the next 4 years, we should move into a high. We should move into a time of prosperity and success, and having things happen in the world that we are happy about. Think about what happened after World War II. How the GIs came home, Congress passed a GI Bill, everybody bought a house, everybody had a car, all kids were educated in public schools. It was like this wonderful time for America to blossom.
Yeah.
So that should be what we're looking at happening within the next few years. And if they're right, that's what's going to happen. And just to demonstrate, and I'm going to just from memory try to remember some of what they predicted. The book's called The Fourth Turning, and it was, as I said, written right at the end of the millennium, or published at the end of the millennium. And we were still in the unraveling stage when they did this, and they predicted the current crisis that we're in. One thing they predicted was the 2008 financial recession, the major
Right.
recession, and they predicted some other things as well. They predicted the election of an African American to high office in the United States. And,
Wow.
and they did some other things that
Yeah.
all came as part of that. So I think they're onto something. And when people share their concerns about where we are in our culture, I pointed out that the research shows then we're not going to stay in it. It's not like insanity where you keep doing the same thing over and over, getting the same result. Things will change. A new generation will take charge and be the leadership, and it will carry us into a different way of being.
You just have to be born at the right time, so you're in one of the good
Well,
periods.
I would suggest that they're all the right time, that they're all necessary. They're just different, but they kind of match the personality characteristics of that particular generation. And, psychologists and sociologists do that all the time,
Yeah.
talk about how Gen X is a certain way, or the baby boomers were a certain way,
Sure.
or anything else. So the characteristics are definitely there. How are they applied? Well, they have their place in the whole thing.
Well, it also, I think of it in terms of fractals. There's so many ways you can look at that. And you've got the generation, you've got the individual in the generation, you've got the time period of four, like in astrology, four yugas, or the astrology predicts all these turning points as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And as an individual, I can see my own life where all of that has taken place within that. I can pick
Exactly.
out the various pieces of it. So I hear that. It sounds like something I need to read.
Oh, I loved it. It just
Yeah.
opened me up to to
Wow.
to what was happening in a way I'd never considered it. And I love patterns. Myers-Briggs, which comes out of Jungian psychology, really worked for me. But then you've got the Enneagram, and you've got these other things
Right.
that approach it from a different direction. They can all be right. And some of them support one another in certain ways, even though their structure is different. So
I
patterns in the human experience? Absolutely. No problem at all that we can do this individually and collectively, and that it all merges into something even greater. I've had
Yeah.
people when because I'm trained in the Myers-Briggs, so I've had people claim that, oh no, they wouldn't fit into one of those pockets. But if they'll just do the instrument, they will. And I'll show them and I'll read to them the general ideas of their character, of their personality, and they'll go, well, that's me. So the stuff works, and
I
it
don't
works.
want to be pegged. Don't
Nah,
peg me
no,
into
that's
that
it.
hole.
People don't want to be pegged. But truly, even though we're all individual, we have similarities.
Oh, sure.
And realizing that, and they don't fall along cultural lines or racial lines or anything else. They're just ways we're the same, and their ways we're different.
Yeah, and it reminds me that, there's a lot to the mystic traditions that understand some of this and knew a lot of this long before we did. One of my favorites is the American Indian, the Native Americans. I mean, there were so many different things that they did that were not in the structure of the education that we have been brought up in. The other favorite that I have is the Australian Aborigines. I mean, the I wrote about a while back, many years now ago, about the Aborigines and some of the things they did that were very intuitive to them, that were counterintuitive to everybody else.
Can I give you an example? One thing about the Aboriginal people of North America, I mean, yeah, they came across the Bering Straits perhaps, but still, the First Nation, as they like to be called, and I think it's a great name, had a tradition generations back where when the Europeans brought alcoholic beverages to this continent, they brought their custom with that. And that was that you got a bottle of booze, you pass it around, everybody drinks some, or you pour it into glasses and everybody drinks. That's not what the native people did with it. When they got it, they would have one person in their circle use the alcohol, and then they would observe that person and see what came from them. Some people say that's where the idea of spirits as a name for alcohol came from. And they
Wow.
watched to see what came forth out of that one that had drunk the alcohol. Isn't that
Wow.
fascinating? What a
Yeah.
different way to do it.
So, and I remember the story of the Aborigine in Australia, where he was leading a group. I don't remember the whole story because it's been a while, but he was leading a group, and they needed water, and they were out in the desert areas. My father was there during World War II, and I think he'd mentioned this story, but they could find water no matter where they were in Australia or even in New Guinea or any of the other places, because wherever they went, they had a sixth sense, quote, of where the water was.
Right.
They also communicated a lot differently than the average person. They didn't use word formations, they used sounds,
Yes.
which to me is intriguing because vibration is how we communicate in the subconscious
Exactly.
and in the collective conscious. So we come back to that idea of the collective consciousness and how it influences us. And I think we discount how much it influences us.
Well, we're the only species that has a very clear use of language, of words and symbols and such as that, as opposed to all other beings on this planet. But virtually all other animals make sounds. Those sounds are communication. So when human beings go to a place of making sound communication, we're simply using the pattern of every other life form in the animal kingdom, which is, maybe even a higher understanding or a higher way of communicating than this thing we call language.
Which does, I think, make sense to me that words cause separation for the most part, whereas any other form of communication, whether it's the energy between people, which we all feel, we all sense when there's something wrong in the room, we all know when we're going to be attracted to the energy of one person and not to another person in the room.
Exactly.
All of those forms tend to be discounted in modern society for sure. And of course, in recent past with witches and all the other anomalies of society, that frightens people. I can't imagine how you could survive if you were an intuitive, Myers-Briggs, not intuitive, but intuitive from the sense you operated from a sense of the energy of what was going on, that you couldn't survive back in the witches' days.
Yeah. That's what Holmes says is the source of mysticism is intuition. That
Yeah.
mystics being able to speak truth are simply doing that through their intuitive senses. It's not that someone told them, but that
Right.
they simply know. And I think that when we allow ourselves to be open, and I would suggest that language actually keeps us separated from that because we're too busy thinking in words.
Yeah.
That we
Yeah.
don't just shut up and be in the silence and see what comes. That often has nothing to do with words.
Right. I often, I ask myself the question, how is the ego, the voice in my head, where did it learn all of these languages? And how did it come up with all of this stuff?
Well, don't be thinking that it's so smart because it can do that.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's so smart. I've had that argument all the time and go, shut up. So the one other thing I wanted to cover about this, is let's come back to this idea that Ernest Holmes talked about is the collective influence on individuals and how we can do something about that. And you talk about treatment. We've talked about spiritual mind treatment in the past. How do we deal with this chaos period, from the chaos that's in our life to the chaos that's in our society? How does an average person deal with this? What can we do? Not necessarily the classic answer today is, oh, just meditate.
Oh, no, no, no. What I would suggest to anyone is if you find yourself judging others for the way they're functioning in society, look at who they are and what they say. They're not wrong. They just have different ways of perceiving life and different opinions about it. So
Yeah,
when we get off our judgment high horse and recognize that everyone's moving through life trying to find their way, we can stop this nonsense of seeing people as wrong. When we do that, the person that gets cut off is us when we find someone else wrong, rather than listening to what they're saying and finding some truth in it. I remember years ago around election time, Barbara had a practitioner class going, and people in the class were complaining and judging for people that were on the other side of the political aisle. And she said, I want all of you to go home and get on your computers and look up the websites of these candidates and find something you agree with. And
hmm,
they were not happy, but they
yeah,
did what they were given to do, and they all came back, and they all had to admit that even these people that they thought were so horrible were promoting some things, not everything, of course, but some things that they could align with. Come on, give it a
yeah,
chance. And we carry the burden of judgment all the time. So claiming the world is falling apart and everything is lost, it puts a burden on us. And when we
yeah,
don't do that, when we become the observer rather than the judger, we get a whole different result.
sure, sure. And I always say that if there's something I don't like in that person or what's going on, I need to find out where it is in me
Ah,
so
yes.
that I can shift that. And the same is true in sense of I talk about, there's so much chaos in the world. I don't actually see any of that chaos. I don't feel it. I don't know about it. I don't understand it, except somebody said there's a lot of chaos in the
Yeah.
world.
And where do they say it? Watch the news.
Watch the
Any
news.
channel. Doesn't matter.
Yep.
They may give you a different take on what's wrong, but they're all going to tell you what's wrong.
They'll all tell you what's wrong. And the whole idea of chaos or everything is changing is it's always changing. Nothing is
Always.
ever not changed.
If it stopped changing, I think it would cease to exist.
It would. The universe wouldn't exist at all because stasis wouldn't allow it to exist.
Exactly. So even thought can't remain the same.
No, can't remain the same. And we don't remain the same.
Never.
I don't look like I used to look when I was 20. I don't sound like it. I don't think like it. There's nothing about me that is the same over the. There's only one thing that's the same over my entire lifetime.
Well, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't mind looking like I did when I was 20.